Hello and welcome. This is episode 2 of the Druid High Performance podcast, and today we're talking about posture as an accompaniment to episode 1, in which we talked about mobility. This is a subject, as was the first one, very close to my heart. They are of akin, these two subjects. They relate to movement and stability, which apply in many forms, many ways. But mostly what we'll be focusing on today is for health and the importance of posture in a modern world where most of us spend, 80% of our time sat down. And even when we are moving, if you look around, as I often do, being a nosy so-and-so, I see very poor posture. People might be walking around with a phone in their hand, so the actual times when they are moving around, they're compromising their posture. But that's something we'll get into as the podcast progresses. Posture is very important, and we'll get into that, but I just wanted to bring attention to it because it's not really talked about as much as maybe it should be, and it's just an area of focus that I've fell into as time progresses with my background, which is in martial arts and qigong and Taoist yoga and things like this. And as I always say, and I said on the previous podcast, when you're a young person, you tend to be more interested, if you're like me, in martial arts and things, in getting out there and getting on with it and learning how to punch and kick and choke people and all this sort of thing. But as you get older, if you do an accompaniment art, be it yoga, tai chi, qigong, pilates or anything like that, that gets more important as I can just picture my jiu-jitsu school that I trained with, and all the young guys just jump straight on the mat and get on with it, and all the old boys and girls are there taping up their hands, they're loosening up their joints, their aching back, their bad knee, their bad hip, and that was definitely me as I got on, being one of the elder statesmen. But anyway, what I wanted to talk about today was some of the issues related to posture and some of the things I've come across kind of researching the area, some things I've reflected on, and some of the evidence you can find if you look around, and just to bring some attention to some things you might not be aware of, some things you might be aware of, and well, let's crack on. So this is the Druid High Performance podcast. This is an area for self-development exploration for body and mind. We're interested here in focus and in performance, as well as longevity and empowerment within the modern world. Because it seems to me that a lot of these things are degrading, and they're not so talked about in the mainstream, I would say. If you look around, most people aren't focused. They aren't looking to perform at a high level. They're distracted. They're getting pulled along. Longevity and empowerment. It seems to me that most people are very much focused on the here and now, and just kind of getting crushed by this modern world we have. It seems to me that more and more people are suffering from the situation we find ourselves in. And so this is a podcast where we're going to tackle some of these topics and just discuss things as we move forward. As I said in the previous podcast, this is it's an opportunity to talk about things. In the future episodes I'll be talking to other people, but as we start, we're going to talk about a lot of the subjects that are close to my heart, and it may well be that new topics come along that I hadn't considered. So it's a free-flowing discussion with no real direction per se. Well, it is direction, but who knows where it's going to go. So these are the sort of topics we're looking at, and moving forward, we could be going anywhere, but it's all going to be in these sorts of areas of focus and performance, longevity and empowerment, because these things are important to me, and I very much feel like there's a lack of these things in and around. So moving on, my view is that this culture of sitting is very detrimental, and we talked about this in the previous podcast. We can't sit all day and have a good posture. Our body tightens up. We feel frail and weak, and so on and so forth. So if you want to learn more about why it's important to move and to look after your joints, I refer you back to podcast number 1. Podcast 2, as I say, is about posture. So we want to counter this posture of sitting by standing. We want to stand often. We want to refine our standing. I mean, we've been standing since we were 2 years old. It's like a lot of things. You hear people sniff and snark about the practice of breath work in Qigong and so on. And people will say, oh, I've been breathing my whole life. What do I need to worry and spend my time thinking about that? It's the same with standing. But the application of these things is not conscious. We need to make it conscious, because so many people breathe poorly, they stand poorly, they might not stand for that much time of the day, if at all, and when they are, they might be looking at their phone, as I said before, they might just be slouched against a wall, so we're not even conscious about the impact this is going to have. So this is partly of what we're discussing today. So standing, it's important. We need to stand often. We are designed to stand. It might be that in a few years we won't have the strength to do that, because we're going to be old and frail and broken down and so on. So very much the time is now to stand. We need to put some time into this. We need to be conscious of the fact that it's important to stand. So initially, obviously we all live in a world of computers and mobile phones and so on and so forth. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is just to have the idea in your mind that we have to break up this sitting. We have to counter it with standing. So we need to internalize an alarm. We need to think about the fact that our hips will get tight if we sit for an hour. It doesn't matter how flexible you are. You could be a dancer or a yoga master who's able to put your feet behind your head and so on. But if you sit for an hour, your hips will get a little bit tight. Obviously, if you're very, very flexible, you're able to warm them back up and stretch out and so forth pretty quickly. But you have to take on board the fact that you will tighten up the hips if you sit down for too long. You will get in a bad position. You will fidget. So we need to get this alarm system. We need to get conscious of the fact that we need to stand up. Now, I advise my clients to use the Pomodoro Technique, which I'm not sure if I mentioned in the previous podcast, but I'll just go into it quickly. It's an alarm. It's a timer. Pomodoro means tomato in Italian, and it's one of those timers that is in the kitchen in the shape of a tomato. Generally, as Pomodoro is 25 minutes long with a 5 minute break. So like most people, or a lot of people at least, they're working on computers, and if they're not in their leisure time, they're on a computer. They're sat there in front of the computer for hours and hours, and we're distracted, and rightly so. Not rightly so. There is so many things that we're able to look at. Excuse me. We're able to look at online or in our working day, and so we're endlessly chasing that new bit of information, that new distraction, and so it's very easy to sit for hours upon hours. But we have to counter that. We have to say to ourselves, no, we need to stand up every half an hour or so and realign our spine. We need to stand up and get our spine in a good position, even if it's in just for 2 minutes. it benefits us. It helps. It's when we're sat down, the major muscles below the waist, the glutes and the legs, are just sat there idle, they're not doing much at all. So we need to get up and we need to engage those muscles. We need to get our head in a good position. We need to stand tall as if the head is lifting to the sky. As I say, even if it's for 2 minutes, if we can break up our sitting and put that in place every half an hour, we're going to do great things for our spine and our posture, our energy levels, our feelings of just energy. We're just going to slouch and just collapse in on ourselves if we just sit there for too long. So this is the first point I'd like to raise, is just having this internal alarm system. If you get that feeling in the front of your hips, which I often do, they're getting a bit tight, I'm starting to kind of really slouch into my chair, we need to stand up at that point. We need to stand up and we need to think about positioning something, a vision of ourselves in our mind of being stable and strong and so on. My background's in Kung Fu, and there is an element of training in Kung Fu which crosses over into Qigong as well, which is a Chinese form of yoga for lack of a better word. It's called standing post, and standing post is stance training. And Kung Fu has got a very very varied and very deep range of training around standing. Various different postures, various different positions, and so I just want to introduce this term to you guys. Standing post. Even it could be holding a press up. It doesn't have to be just stood on our feet, but if we just take the point that standing in a good strong position is just very, very good for us. It's very good for the internal structures of the postural muscles, just having the spine aligned, the head in good position, the hips in good position, the major muscle groups engaged, as opposed to not engaged as they are when we're sat down. So this standing post, I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of postures. They go very, very deep into it, but I just want to introduce that term so that you can become more familiar with it, and we don't have to get too crazy and too complicated with it. The worst thing you can do is overcomplicate things just about applying this standing post and seeing the value in it. So what can we do? What can we do to counter the sitting and to give ourselves a more strong and vibrant posture, which is a great foundation for us? You know, it's the very building blocks of fitness and strength and so on. So we want to think about engines of posture, engines which allow us within the body. Engine might not be the best term, but I'm going to go with it. So they're these engines of posture, or these foundations within the body. Now I talk about it with mobility, but also it applies to posture. The shoulder girdle, the neck and the hips, these are big structures in the body, and these are the foundational positions. You know, there's a lot of muscle and bone and ligaments and tendons and so on and so forth all in these areas, and if they're in a bad position, then we are unable to we're not in a strong position. We're not able to hold much weight, absorb much impact, which we'll talk about later, if we're not in a good position. Sorry. So I want you to become aware of your shoulder girdles, your neck, and your hips, and consider these engines of posture, or foundations, or keystones, or whatever term you feel comfortable with. But be aware of this. So many people. Obviously this is my area of interest, and when you do have an area of interest, you just assume the masses of people have the same area of interest, but that's not the case. And I know that's not the case, but I'm just used to thinking about these things. But it's trying to get these points across to you guys, so that you do appreciate how important these things are. So the shoulder girdle is between the shoulders, the upper back, the upper chest, and obviously it's a big old lump of body. There's a lot of things going on and around there, and the neck sits right on top of there. And so the shoulder girdle and the neck are very much next to each other, and they're very much interconnected. And the hips, opposite end of the body, obviously below the torso, but you've got masses of tissue there, masses of bones and so on. So we need to create tension in these keystones. We'll call them keystones. So we need to have tension. We need to get conscious with this. We need to be aware of these parts of the body, and we need to refine it. We need to apply ourselves to this. Very much so. It seems to me that people are very much focused on the external, or they're focused on, rightly so. There's a lot going on in their lives, maybe, but it's important to be connected to your body. You've only got the one. It's a pretty in-depth and amazing bit of kit, very adaptable stuff. So it's very much the onus is on us to get some interaction going with our body. We need to, this is my view, to have a basic understanding of what we can do with it. And a lot of people that we do PE at school, and they're not, what do we get taught? I mean, I can't remember, but it wasn't much, and it wasn't that effective. I can't imagine I mean, I did a lot of things as a kid, and but it didn't really give me enough, I think, or it didn't really communicate how important it was to get engaged with the body and why that's important. And I still don't think to this day, it's probably worse nowadays, to be honest. But so we've got these three keystones: the shoulder, girdle, neck, and the hips. These areas are important. We want to get really engaged with these parts of the body. Now, what we want to think about when we're thinking about these parts of the body, especially the shoulder, girdle, and the hips, is this idea of external rotation. So externally rotating away from the center of the body. This is going to give us a stronger posture. It's going to create torque, and it's going to give us a foundation for strength. So torque is an idea I picked up from listening to Kelly Starrett talk, reading his book, which I recommend to everyone who listens to this. Great book, called Desk Bound. Really got me focused on the issues with sitting and the kind of issues with the modern world. So torque, as he talks about, and he really goes on about this external rotation in this book and in his podcast and so on. It's sort of, torque is having dynamic tension in two directions. So if we take a simple position like standing in a nice strong position, they call it two character position in Qigong, Kung Fu, and Tadasana in yoga. And with this external rotation, it sits on top of standing tall. So if I stand nice and tall, with my head rising up to the sky, and I'm really extending myself to my full height, I'm thinking to myself, I want to feel like I'm 10 foot tall. You know that expression, I feel 10 foot tall. What does that mean? I feel 10 foot tall. I feel confident. I feel good in myself. I want to raise myself up to my full height. So in my upper torso, I'm extending up, but in my lower torso, my legs are dead straight, because the taller I stand, the straighter my legs have to be. So the external rotation works in addition to that standing tall. So if I imagine I'm standing tall in both the upper and the lower torso, that's one direction. Now if I have, excuse me, if my, got a bit of a cough at the moment, as you might hear. If I'm standing very tall, I've got dynamic tension in the lower and upper torso going up. But if I want to create torque, I need at least two directions. So this external rotation I'm talking about works in both the shoulder girdle, the shoulders kind of roll back and my chest broadens, and the same happens in my hips. I'm engaging the muscles on the back and the sides of these structures. So I'm getting that rotation, that torque, giving two directions to both. And this external rotation is very, very important. And you'll find that the more you look at exercise and strength training, and even body weight training, this teaching point comes up again and again: external rotation. Now, So if you take your hands in front of you, inward rotation means you're kind of rolling your arms towards the center, so your knuckles will face towards each other's hands. If you hold your arms in front of you, roll your hands towards the center. And I'm not sure about you, but my shoulders don't feel too comfortable in that position, especially my left shoulder. Now the external rotation, the arm's going to roll away from each other until my palms face the ceiling. So inward rotation, kind of weak. I'm not sure about you, but if someone came up and like shoved my arms when they were inwardly rotated, my shoulders wouldn't enjoy that too much. Now, if I do rotate them out so my palms face the ceiling and I got shoved, they wouldn't feel so bad. The shoulders feel like they're a lot more loose in this position. Also, the muscles in my upper back seem to be engaged in this external rotation. So if we look at powerlifting and bodyweight exercises, you'll find that if I'm going to pick up a big heavy weight in relative terms, if I don't have this external rotation, there's a lot of muscle groups I'm not engaging, and this makes a problem. You'll notice if you throw on YouTube and you find a powerlifting video where they're talking about technique about lifting a big old weight, be it deadlifts or bench presses or squats or anything like that. More often than not, they'll talk about this external rotation. And this external rotation not only creates a stable platform for the specific joint, but it also attaches to the musculature of the body. It's interesting because I'm not a strength guy. I've done very little weight training in relation to the martial arts training I've done. I've done a little bit, but I'm by no means a strength guy. But what I found very interesting in reading Starrett's book and looking at powerlifting and training with some strength guys and more as I look at the application to martial arts and so on and so forth, you'll find there's a lot of crossover between sort of strength training and qigong and yoga and so on and so forth. So it's like there's some wisdom there that carries over between disciplines. Very interesting to me, but you'll find that the same technique applies to someone who wants to pick up a big old heavy weight to someone who wants to increase the longevity and the energy which was within their body, which as qigong and yoga does, as well as powerlifting. So this external rotation, especially in these keystone areas, as again the neck, the shoulder girdle, and the hips, these keystone postural areas and external rotation go hand in hand. Now, obviously, the neck is hard to think about external rotation when it's alone, but if we think about how the neck bleeds in or feeds into the shoulder girdle, then that makes a lot of sense to me. So yeah, the powerlifting, the qigong and yoga, there's a lot of crossover there. And there's a story which I'd like to tell you guys now, which really rammed this home to me. So back in 2012, I live in London. So back in 2012, as you might know, the Olympics was in town, and one day the Olympics had come and gone, but the Paralympic Games were still going. Excuse me. And so we had tickets to this, and we went along and saw a few different events, and it was interesting enough. But the thing that really jumped out to me was the powerlifting. Now, this was in the Paralympic Games, so it was a different sorts of events. But bench press was still an event, and I forget the category, forgive me, but there was in the women's category for powerlifting, I can't remember the weight class, but there was this lady, I think she was from Egypt. She was in a wheelchair. She came out, and I think she weighed around 60 kilos. I'm not sure exactly, but something around that. Not particularly heavy. And she came out and she bench pressed. Forgive me, I don't know the exact amount, but it was somewhere in the region of 160 kilos. And I remember messaging my brother, who's much more interested in strength training than I, and I was just like, "What's your PB?" It wasn't 160 kilos, and I was just like, there's this 60 kilo woman, maybe she was lighter than that. she's putting up 160 odd kilos, and my deadlift, I've never been a particularly big lifter, as I mentioned, but my deadlift's not that big. Here's this woman, this small diminutive woman, putting up 160 odd kilos, and I was just thinking, how is she doing this? This is just absurd. And what I noticed was her arms were not straight; they were kind of angled out. And around this time, I'd been looking into the external rotation I mentioned before, and why that's required, and why that's so important. And then I'm looking at her arm position, and I'm imagining the torque in her upper back, her shoulder girdle, that how she's putting up this weight. And I'm thinking, because when you're traditionally taught about bench press at the very low level, it's thought about as being a chest exercise. But the way her arms were angled, and the way she was putting up this weight, it just made me think back. This woman's got a strong back, and she's sort of anchoring her arms into her back. She's kind of screwing them into position with this external rotation, and it was just 160 odd kilos. I mean, that is a massive amount of weight. I'm 80 kilos, so the fact that she's lifting two of me off her back straight up, it's just like, I'll never forget that for as long as I live. And it really struck me how strong someone can be, some diminutive lady like that, but how important it is to use that external rotation. That's in pure strength terms, but if you don't have that foundation, you're not picking up the weight. So, long story short, the importance of external rotation, massive. And how that works with the hips. I mean, it's easier to kind of visualize, I suppose, when you're seeing some lady of 60 kilos lifting up near 3 times her weight. I mean, it's just staggering, to be honest. Unbelievable. And it wasn't until now I've been doing I had my black belt in Kung Fu at that point, and so I've been training in martial arts 12 odd years at that point, and I never had anyone turn around to me and say about like the external rotation in the hips to create power and this strength, this platform to deliver power. You always hear in martial arts terms that the power comes from the ground, comes up through the body, but it was never really explained to me that this same sort of external rotation in the feet to engage the muscles on the hips to kind of create that kinetic chain, if you will, to draw up the power. It was never really explained to me until I went to a yoga class and met with a yoga teacher who was, 70 years old, lady herself. But really, she was hammering that into me when we'd start the class standing in Tadasana, which is just the classic standing posture. And it just made me think of when standing, because in going back to the standing post idea, I understand I'm kind of jumping around at the moment, all over the place a little bit, but when you think about the standing post, when I was training, it was more about you do your grading, you got to do this stance for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is, and you just kind of gritted your teeth and bared it, but it wasn't really explained explicitly. Maybe it was, but I just wasn't picking this up. The utility of creating this external rotation, not only did it make the task less difficult because you're stronger in this position, but also the utility of using that external rotation to deliver power. So it's funny how it works. You'll go through all these trials and tribulations, and you'll pass your grading by hook or by crook. You near collapse after because your legs have absolutely given way. But it was not until years later that someone really sat me down or explained to me, or it really clicked in my mind why that's so important. So as I say, it was easy to see that when you're seeing some diminutive women lift up such a massive weight, but not so much with the stance. But then it makes so much sense, if you think about a cricket player hitting a shot, or a golfer, or you name it. If they don't have that dynamic tension between their legs, creating that external rotation which engages in the hips and then goes up through the spine, there's going to be a real lack of stability. This is maybe not something that most people think about, but if there's stability for me to knock a ball out of the park for a six or a home run in baseball, then that same stability is going to be good for my health. If I'm sat all the time and I don't have this sort of neuromuscular connection in my hips, creating that external rotation, how am I going to be able to stand with good posture into my later years? How am I going to get that longevity and that sense of empowerment in my body if I don't do that? It's not going to happen, is it? But when you see elite athletes do things, sometimes it's going to have to click in your mind. And as I say, seeing that lady do that and being explained to me by this yoga instructor, it all sort of came together. It's like posture's so important, not just for performance, but also for health. So bit of a long ramble there, but I hope that makes sense. So we've got these keystone areas. External rotation is important. This external position, it's a platform for strength and health and longevity and empowerment and so on and so forth. But also we've got a very complicated body, so we need to create pressure and stability throughout the other parts. Another thing they talk about in both Qigong and yoga and powerlifting is abdominal pressure and belly breathing and creating that stability within the core, which is another fascinating part to all this. Now, I'm not going to go in too much depth, but belly breathing, excuse me, is very important for health. We're going to do a whole podcast on breath at a later date, so I'm not going to go into it too much. But the more our abdomen can expand and contract with our breath, the more sort of abdominal pressure we can engage. It's going to help. It's going to keep our cells relaxed. We're going to deepen our breath. We're going to bring more oxygen in. We're going to transport more of that oxygen around with our heart and lungs and so on and so forth. But also, we're talking about posture today. So having that contraction on the out breath to create stability within the belly is so important. It's so a good teaching point I like to think with my students is teaching them Qigong or any sort of standing post. We think about the shrink wrapping of the lower spine, this effect on the in-breath. As I mentioned, you want to support and create stability in and around the spine, from basically the base of the spine, you can say all the way up to the solar plexus, just so that you imagine there's a sheath of muscle surrounding the spine, and you just want to gently and softly contract that just to hold and support position. So it's like a stabilizing effect, just creating a stabilizing force whilst doing your standing post, or if you're sit down in a chair, you just want to imagine that your spine is being held by the musculature surrounding it, just to support it. So you've got these keystones of the neck, shoulder girdle and the hips, but you also need to link it with this massive amount of tissue you have here in your abdomen and so on. So it's just about creating that stabilizing force in between those keystones, as I mentioned. And the belly breathing is a great way to do that. Make yourself conscious of that pressure. It's about putting these elements together. You have your keystones and the connective tissue. So the back is a big issue for a lot of people. It seems to me sitting a lot makes the spine brittle, and people try to remedy this in many different ways, and you'll see suggestions of weight training to heal back pain by using squats, by deadlifting, and these sort of movements. Now, my question with that is, if you're an experienced weight trainer, maybe you can alleviate issues with your back by lifting weights, but in my discussions with people, it tends to be people who are not that proficient weight training. They're not experienced lifters. So the idea to me that you'd be able to, or it'd be even advisable to start lifting weights of that compound variety. So as I say, the deadlifts and the squats and so on, to heal your back, I think is a dangerous path to go. And there's a lot of contention on weightlifting. Some people are very, very pro lifting weights, some people against it. Some people from strongman community and other powerlifting community will see these core lifts as essential to back maintenance. But as I say, I'm really talking to people which are untrained. They've already got a sore back. Is weight training a good way to go? So I did see a podcast with a strongman not hesitating. He was asking people to be mindful of doing such exercises as a deadlift, because the risk versus to reward on that sort of exercise, especially if you're dealing with a bad back already, is very, very, very touchy, and people get very defensive when weightlifting is criticised, and I get it, because some people are very much into that. So I just wanted to talk quickly about that podcast I mentioned. So in the podcast, professional strongman, one of the strongest people in the world, was cautioning people from deadlifting about basically highlighting the risk versus reward issues with deadlifting. And there was a lot of controversy with this, and some people came out in the defense of these powerlifting moves such as squats and deadlifts, and said they were fine for the back. And they're probably right in trained practitioners, people who have been lifting for a while, and people who are very serious about technique, making sure that they get their technique right and their reps range right, and all that side of things. Whereas, as the guy came out later and said, the guy who was cautioning against deadlifts was basically, he reiterated his point, but he clarified that he was really talking, in his view, about professional athletes or college level athletes in the US, so the high level athletes, but they are doing some other sports such as American football, or maybe they're doing some wrestling, I don't know. But they weren't so diligent with their technique. They were just obviously very physically strong, very physically gifted, and able to put up weight, but they weren't doing it in such a way which was good for long-term health, basically, he was saying. And when I saw him saying that, it made me think of untrained people, or people which are a modest fitness level, who are sitting too much, are getting a little bit older. And it made clear in my mind that if you've got someone untrained, someone who's too sedentary, asking them to do something such as deadlifts and squats to heal back injuries, I think, is a recipe for disaster. And as I always say, if someone's a very high level lifter, really know what they're up to, then very much likely they can protect their back, and they will have a very strong back, and they will have a very strong posture. But that's this is not who my podcast is for. Those people are specifically trained in that, and they are looking to do as good a job with their technique as possible, and that's great. The people I'm really keen to speak to are the people which are, as I say, inactive, and really I don't think them picking up a barbell is the best way to go. But that's my view. If you're taking someone who's very skilled at the art of lifting, they get very serious about the technique being right and making sure the right muscles are doing the right thing. It comes back to my idea of something I've heard many times as I've been training going along the years, as treating exercise as Qigong and Qigong as exercise. So if you see a really, really good lifter, they're going to have immaculate posture, they're going to have immaculate technique, and so they're very specific about their technique, much like a Qigong or a yoga instructor, or someone very skilled in that art as well. So it's sort of like you want to have this philosophy of endless refinement, this philosophy of always looking to attain that perfect lift, that perfect form, that perfect balance, that perfect stance. And that way you're always looking for areas to improve on, and you want to have a long-term effect, a long-term viewpoint on that. And if you do, then both exercise in Qigong or yoga is going to have a real beneficial effect on your health. So if you take a simple bodyweight exercise like a squat or a press-up, we don't think about just getting that exercise done and seeing it as like a slog to do those techniques, but we want to do those and put as much effort and focus and preparation on that set of exercises as possible, because we want to improve as we go. Because we're not, as we're going to get older, we don't want to throw ourselves around maybe and exercise at breakneck speed as we did when we were younger. But here we're looking more of a longevity philosophy, a longevity and refinement philosophy. So we're looking to do, say, an exercise like take an exercise like the press up. When you're younger, you might be ripping those off as fast as you can, not doing too good to your elbows, and having very unstable motion through that exercise. But as we get a bit older, we want to slow down and get the most out of that exercise. Put as much of our focus as we can into that to do the best job we can with it, and that way we're going to get good returns. There's a lot of benefit, not so much risk, not so much cost, and we're able to get the most out of it. And as I say, we treat it like something that's going to enhance the body, not just something to get over. It's so it's a mindset switch. We could be in a class when we're being asked to do a lot of jumping around, burpees and so on, and this sort of thing, and we just rinse through it as fast as we can. Risk of injury is quite high, but also we're not really getting the most out of those exercises. We need to have that stability, that posture, and that refinement, that accuracy as we go forward, so we're going to get the most out of it. And this really takes me to how this can affect different parts of our posture, and how good posture can affect different elements of anything that we do. Just from everyday standing is one thing. Walking, you see people walking with terrible postures, but this podcast is really going to talk about Qigong and martial arts, and having great posture, not just good for health, as I keep saying, but also very good for clinching. Posture and grappling and clinching, they're always talking about, your teacher always talk about controlling your opponent's posture. Because no matter how strong someone is, if you wrap their head up, get them looking at the floor, that's going to fatigue them. It's going to make it very difficult for them. It doesn't matter how strong they are, but poor posture sort of breaks everything down. And you can really feel it, obviously, when you're in there having someone maybe quite a bit lighter than you who's able to control you purely from their form, their posture, and their ability to put their weight on you. It really rings home when you have that experience. If you've not had that experience, maybe it's difficult to get across, but posture is key in those areas. And it takes me to one of my old injury stories that I had a few years back. And you learn from your mistakes, they say. So I was at jiu-jitsu class, and I was in a position where I was broke. My posture was broken down. So as I said before, I was the one looking at the floor. I had a lot of weight pulling me down. I didn't clear the grip on me before I started to try and posture up, and the effect of that was, as I forced my head up so I could look straight ahead of me instead of being pulled down to the mat, my neck gave out. So any time that you got someone hanging off your head, and you just decide to use your neck against their whole weight, I caution you against that. So what happened in that case was I got a pinched nerve in my neck, which actually shut down the communication between my brain and my tricep. So the muscle on the back of my arm on the right side, so much so that the right arm, I'm right-handed, became the weakest of my arms for a short time, just from forcing myself into a position when someone was hanging off my head. And the reason was, if the person who'd been controlling me had hold of my neck or even the base of my head, it wouldn't have been a problem. I could have cleared on my posture. My neck would have dealt with me looking up in that point, because he wasn't able to get too much leverage on me. The point was, he had good leverage. He hadn't controlled the crown of my head. So I really forced against a really advantageous position for him. He had all the leverage on me, and I forced my head up, and my neck injured myself. But as I say, with all great mistakes, you learn if you're smart, if you're lucky. And this brings me to back to the thing I was mentioning earlier about the 3 keystones. So the very top keystone is the neck and head position. Now you see so many people with their chin tucked to their chest, but what about the opposite? Imagine that person had he was hanging off the crown of my head, so I was in a really bad spot. But if I bring my crown back ever so slightly, imagine we're stood up on 2 feet, and I think I say to you, to really get the best out of this top keystone of the neck and shoulders, or sorry, the neck and head. Neck and head, top keystone, what's the best way to position ourselves? So what's the best way to keep that keystone doing its best for us? Well, 80% of our energy wants to be sending our head up, imagining, excuse me, I've still got a bit of a cough. We've got, imagine we've got a string on the top of the head, typical teaching point from yoga and qigong and other such exercises and arts. So imagine our head is suspended, as being pulled gently up to the sky, lengthening our spine and taking the weight off our spine. So the head's pretty heavy, kind of sits heavy on the top of the spine. They're crushing us into the ground ever so, if you like. But this teaching point lifts the head up. So instead of the head sitting on the spine, it's actually lifting up to the sky. So we say about 80% of the force or energy we're applying from our head and neck is going upwards. Leaves us 20% of energy, tension, whatever you want to call it. I want here my crown to just slowly move backwards. Now, I only want to put 15-20% of my energy into this, and what I don't want is my chin to lift. What I want to do is just bring my head back ever so slightly. So we imagine those people looking at their phones all the time, or they're sat on a computer and they're kind of in a C-shaped spine. We want to bring our head back. As I say, we're only using 15% of our stability or our dynamic tension and using the head and neck position. So as I say, the head's rising, but it's just lifting backwards. So the crown, the back of the head is just moving backwards slightly, just to create a nice curve. Everyone else is sat forward, craning forward with really poor form. We're gonna sit back away. It feels quite nice to do that, as I say. 15%, 20% of the head moving back, 80% up. So you've got that dynamic tension. We've got energy moving in two directions, as I mentioned earlier, with the torque. It's not until you get injured in a certain position that you get to be really conscious of of a better way to do things. So it's an important idea to understand from a martial arts point of view. Having your head in a good position, as relates to your neck, shoulders and hips, allows you to absorb a lot more punishment. Posture and absorbing strikes have strong correlation. I've always said for many years that sometimes that you'll get hit hard by something. This could be anywhere on the body. You don't feel it at all. Kind of a good power shot, and it hits you, and there's no problem. It's like, it's surprising. You think to yourself, oh, is it going to hurt? But it didn't hurt. You barely felt it. But the opposite is also true. Sometimes you get hit softly by something, and it hurts a hell of a lot. And it tends to be when you're a bit out of position. And little tap, which someone stood there watching and seen that, they'd be like, that was nothing. But receiving it hurts a hell of a lot. Now, I've got a little story about that. I was sparring a good friend of mine once, and he caught me with a jab on the point of my chin. Terrible place to get hit, but also my mouth was open. So they always say keep the chin tucked and your jaw clenched. It's got a gum shield there, so you got a nice braced position. I don't know what I wasn't concentrating, or I was just distracted or whatever. So my jaw's slightly open. I get hit on the tip of the chin, and my jaw swivels ever so slightly. And in your mind's eye, it seems quite a bit, but it probably wasn't. But it hurts so much because there's nerves at the ends of your jaw, right in there, deep in the jaw there. And if you get hit there on the jaw and it moves around in the socket there, you will feel it. And it was a tap, a very light shot. That's the main point of this. If it hit me, if it in a good, clean, hard shot, then it would have been big trouble. But there was a little tap, but it hit me in the perfect spot there. So if my head's in a bad position, as relates to my neck, just every day, I'm going to develop postural issues. But also if I've got my head in a bad position and I get hit, my jaw could be in bad position, or my head and neck's in a bad position. If I'm in a good position, I'm much more likely to absorb that. And it might just be that I don't really even feel it. I mean, it could hurt still, but being in the right position is good long-term health-wise for our posture, but it also affects the ability for us to absorb strikes or knocks. And it takes me to a famous story. For anyone who's interested in MMA, you'll know this story very well. But if you're not, this is a story demonstrating just this fact. Anderson Silva was the middleweight champion of the world in UFC for, I can't remember how long now, 8 years or so. Yeah, many, many title defenses. He looked unbeatable for a long time, and everyone thought he was the greatest champion of all time. And I just want to take two brief examples. There was one fight where he fought Dan Henderson, known as big power puncher, wrestler. It tends to be that if Dan Henderson wins, excuse me, yeah, his big right hand's going to factor into that. And I think it was in the second round of his fight with Anderson Silva, he lands his vaunted right hand flush on Anderson Silva's chin, and comes back with a left hand too. And Anderson just shook it off, almost kind of smirked. And you can hear the impact of these shots, but he was in good position. You know, as I say, he had the keystone was in the right spot. His neck and chin and hips were all in a line. He was in good solid position. He saw the shot as well. Good point here is that he saw the shot. He got hit clean with two solid punches. He's in good straight posture. He sees them, so he's able to kind of brace those. Happy days. He survives. He comes back to win. He didn't even need to survive. He wasn't wobbled at all by these shots. That was the thing. He got hit so hard, barely felt it. He reacted like he barely felt it. Now, the counter to this is when Anderson lost his title to Chris Weidman some years later. I can't remember how many wins he had in between, but he came to fight Chris Weidman some years later. An interesting point of this fight was that he was joking around in this fight a lot. He was very, very confident. He got clipped with a little shot and started to kind of lampoon, started to pretend to be hurt. And he started to shake his legs and bend his knees like he is wobbled. And he leant right back from the waist, so that he was leant right back, so there was nothing underneath his head, if you follow me. So his feet are the furthest thing forward, then back a little bit as hips, and then back even further as his chin. Now this is where he got hit by Chris Weidman. Now bear in mind, a few years previously got hit with one of the biggest punchers in the division, took it no problem. In this one, he got hit with not a massive strike, but a decent strike nonetheless. But he was in such bad position, his posture was so poor, that he wasn't able to absorb that shot. So he got cleaned, hit on the jaw, fell down, got finished, lost his title. It was, to me, a real clear indication of how important posture is, not just for these these fighters fighting for world titles, but if they're able to absorb that much better contact from another martial artist hitting them clean on the chin, if they're able to better absorb it with a better posture, we can learn from that. Us normal people that don't get in a cage and fight for a living, but want ourselves to continue to develop and improve our health and so on and so forth as we get older. So yeah, posture, so important. We don't even know the full extent to how important it is to us. That little story there really highlights it for me. I remember looking at a study quite recently. I'm putting together some things to read related to posture, and posture and falling as people get older. There's a couple of issues related to connected awareness, being stood up much of the time, and having that kind of neuromuscular connection between obviously both the brain, but the legs and the lower extremities. Because if we're sat down all the time and we're not very active, we lose a lot of that. But also there was a strong correlation between hip flexibility and falling. So as people get older, they sit more and more, as I keep saying, and they get less range of motion in their hips, and they kind of compensate by doing the lurching this way and that, and they're unable to move in uninhibited, so they take liberties, they take shortcuts, and what happens is people tend to fall more often. So they looked at all the people who have been falling over, they measured their hip flexibility, and there seems to be a correlation there. So too much sitting ends up costing you. You end up on the floor as you get older, and as you get older and weaker, one of those falls could be really, devastating. And so many people will break their hip, break their leg as they get older because they haven't got the strength in them that they used to do. So now I'm assuming the people who are listening to the podcast aren't the most senior people in society, but there might be a few. But for those people around 35 and above, we want to keep in mind bits of data like that. We want to keep our hips flexible as we go on. We want to be strong in our stance. We want to be, we want to be that power lifter who's lifting that massive weight. They're very serious about it themselves when they do that. And we need to be the same. We need to be looking after our hips, looking after our 3 keystones, ensuring that we're not going to be one of those statistics of people that fell over when we're a bit older and we never really recover from that. And you might not think that could happen, but it happens to a lot of people. So something to bear in mind there, not to bring a downer on things too much, but you look at the correlation between poor posture and heart and lungs function as well, sort of the pressure, the crushing pressure of having a head forward and a collapsed chest, and what that does to the heart and lungs. So as I say before, a lot of what we're going to talk about next week is going to be revolved around, or the next episode is going to be around breathing. But if we're breathing very shallowly, a lot of the pressure builds up in our necks and our upper torso, upper chest area. Plus we've got this terrible posture, so the heart and lungs are really working at very low efficiency, and we're building pressure. We're creating more and more tension in around the neck. Hypertension's a problem, heart issues are a problem. So the opposite is also something we can really get our hands on, get to grips with. The better the posture, the better the head position, the broader the chest, the second keystone there. Now the heart can work, it's got room to work, it's not getting crushed from above. And the lungs and the heart are obviously stuck in the chest there, and if the neck's completely collapsed, the chest is completely collapsed, it's not got the room to work for us, to bring in as much oxygen, to pump it around effectively, passing it through the lungs into the heart, passing it through, expelling the carbon dioxide, and so on and so forth. It all links together. We want to be resilient. We want to be able to take force on us. Obviously, as I say, we're not getting in a cage and fighting, but just walking around in a busy town or city, good posture allows you to absorb people knocking past you and so on, or anything that might happen. All things to bear in mind. So collapsed spines, more likely to be falling, and it takes us on now to collapsed spines and mobile phones and computers. We've touched on it, and just to reiterate the point that we need to be very, very mindful, not the biggest fan of that term, but more conscious of the effect of mobile phones and computers on the posture. And if we've been on the phone for a while or using computers, we need to offset that. We need to reset posture. We can't just carry on and on using these devices and not pay a price. We have to reset. So whenever you're on the computer, be conscious of that certain time, as a certain amount of time passes, that you need to stand up and readjust and put into practice those keystones we talk about, the head moving away from the screen. Obviously the most natural thing in the world is to get closer to the screen. The chair doesn't get closer, so we end up in this sort of reverse Anderson Silva position where the spine's not in a line. We want to bring that spine straight, have it subtly moving back away from us. probably the problem for our age. And it's about consistency with things like this. You can always think of hours of posture work being undone by a few minutes of poor posture. If you all day you've been in fairly good position, but then you get in a terrible position for 5 minutes, then you're gonna feel it after. You're gonna be sore after that. So you have to reset. You can't get into that poor position and then carry on in a poor position. Always worth thinking about resetting. So you just want to have a timer in your mind. Half an hour is a good time to have in mind. When I'm working on my desk, I get that feeling. I feel a bit antsy. Feel like I've been sat down too long. I want to reset. It tends to be around half an hour. Reset my position. Work through the keystones. Think about that dynamic tension in the stomach area. So we've got that shrink wrapping of the spine. It doesn't have to be a long time. You could be working towards a project. You could be working to a tight deadline, and you think to yourself, I've got 8 hours. I've got to get through this and need to do as much work as possible. But we all know 8 hours isn't really 8 hours. It's we're not like our full capacity at that point. We need to break it up. We need to take a step away from the screen. And I'm not talking about long steps away. Short steps away. Reset the posture. Give ourselves some time to refresh. Critical. Because we get so broken down in these positions in front of the computer for so long that we end up in these bad positions, and we want to keep going. We want to submit this work. So sometimes our own industriousness can work against us. We can take 5 minutes. We can step away. We can stand up. We can realign the keystones, and then we can come back, and we'll find 5 minutes. You can find that 5 minutes. Rest and recovery really recharges us, and we can get back to it. That's something we'll talk about much more in a later episode. It's all about consistency. The importance of consistency is key here. We're not looking to do this for a week and then move on to something else. We want to manage our posture for us as long as we can, because we've only got the one body, and that's the way it is. So we want to build some strategies, some rules, some simple rules, not too many rules, some simple rules that we can get in place, things that we can apply to our day and everyday working life. And there's another bit of data I've been looking at is to do with posture and confidence, self-esteem and self-belief and things like this. And there's a bit of controversy on this subject because you might be aware there was a TED talk a few years back about something called power posing or power postures. And basically this psychologist, Cuddy, I believe the name was, did a bit of research where they had people standing with impeccable posture and open chests and standing up tall, and they looked at cortisol levels, and what they found was that with a better posture, or a more upright posture, or power posture as they called it, the cortisol levels dipped or dropped, and I believe it was testosterone was higher. So testosterone had gone up and cortisol had gone down in a relatively short amount of time. And she published her work, and she did this TED talk and got 25 million views. And she's off to the corporate world selling this, and you could see all sorts of politicians and big business CEOs doing this sort of work. But person I know was pointed out that they were unable to replicate the studies, and so basically they looked to repeat the work that was done by this research team, and they were unable to replicate the results, which put a damper on things, as you quite imagine. She's already out into the world, the researcher from the first study, and she's working with Fortune 500 companies, FTSE 100 companies, and so on and so forth. But the key issue was, did it really work? Now, it seems a no-brainer to me that posture and confidence are related in self-esteem and self-belief. But you always have to be cautious looking at a study like that, or any study, to see exactly what's going on there. And it's easy to be skeptical of anything related in this area when you see something seem to be showing evidence in one direction, but then it's not so conclusive. But I have found other studies recently preparing for the podcast, which does have a correlation between um, self-esteem and belief and posture, but it wasn't measuring those same neurochemicals and stress hormones. It was more to do with self-reports. But there's something definitely to be said there about posture and confidence. And to me, it speaks to the latent power in the body. There's an awful lot of strength in the body, and a lot of people you will find consider themselves weak, and they find it very difficult to even consider themselves strong. They don't even want to think that they could become strong. They see that as not being them. A lot of ladies, when they hear the idea of having strength, they quickly rush to, oh, I don't want to have big muscles. I don't want to look too masculine, and so on and so forth. But as I always say to ladies in that situation, no one gets big and chunky with muscle unless they really work for it. And it's important to encourage yourself and to consider yourself as having inner strength or strength. And it's important because it's a very strengthening word to say, especially when you're referring to yourself. So I did quickly come across things which I found quite interesting. So I found this bit of data: if roughly 450 of the skeletal muscles in our body contracted at once, they would produce on average a force equal to 25 tons. So for everyone out there who doesn't like to think of themselves as being particularly strong, I think a stat like that should change your whole perception. Now you might not have that force of 25 tons, but that's the average. So you might be a bit less than that, you might be a bit more than that, but the combined strength of the body is something to behold. It's just a lot of us don't know how to put that strength into action. We don't know how to give ourselves that proper position, that platform to deliver that strength. So, we've even, if you look into it, you'll see studies where 80 and 90-year-old adults will report increases in strength with resistance training. I did find, and it's even effective for people with osteoarthritis. Again, going back to that point about using exercise for strength is great, but we need to make sure we're refined in our technique. But even 80 or 90-year-olds, sedentary people which aren't doing much of a tool, they can build new muscle, they can get stronger. So people need to hear this. A lot of people just think to themselves, oh, I'm weak, I've always been weak, I've got this problem here, I've got this problem, I've got a psychological issue, I've got a physical issue. To be strong isn't for me. I'm not mentally strong, I'm not physically strong. It's nonsense. You really need to put it in the affirmative and just be aware of what your body is capable of reacting to. It doesn't matter how old you are and what condition you're in, you can still improve your strength, your posture, and your resistance, your toughness, your ability to withstand things. It's all very much psychological, and just be aware that you can get stronger. You can build on this foundation, and it's all about rebuilding. You're constantly kind of getting knocked back with little things here, little things there. We're always rebuilding, we're always strengthening. There is a condition where age-related loss of skeletal muscle is called sarcopenia. The more inactive we are as we get past the age of 30, our muscle actually breaks down quicker than people under that age group. So you could take that two ways. You could say, okay, that's not so much fun, my body's breaking down quicker. Okay, but how do we counter that? How do we maintain our muscle mass? We just have to do regular exercise. And we're not talking about heavy weightlifting, we're not talking about killing ourselves with exercise. We just need to maintain our muscle mass by doing some simple exercises, doing some simple yoga and qigong, some standing post, some solid exercises from a solid position, and that means we'll keep our strength, keep our muscle for years and years and years to come. There's a lot of interesting data out there, and the way I look at it, it's all very, very positive, you know. Build your posture, keep your body lively, keep it strong, and it will look after you as we go forward. And the latent power in the body is really remarkable. So, as I say, a lot of people struggle with the idea of having strength in their body and mind. I would encourage anyone listening to this podcast to be very comfortable, to become very comfortable with the idea of thinking of yourself as strong in both body and mind. You know, you're blessed with this great body. You might not have the greatest natural talent and athletic ability in the world, but that's irrelevant. What you do have is a body that functions. I'm guessing for pretty much everyone out there listening. So, and if something's not working, work around it, because other bits of you are going to be working great, and they can always work better. The idea that we've got this condition and it's holding us back, you have to get that out of your mind. You have to think about what is possible when you push yourself and move forward. So you've got to never give up on yourself. You've got to keep going, keep pushing yourself, and who knows where you can end up with a mindset like that. So stand tall, stand strong, have faith in yourself and in something higher than you, bigger than you, and aim towards that and keep pushing. I mean, knowing something is useful, but only if applied. Quote I like to read out quickly really illustrates that point. It's about action. The quote says this: the blood of heroes is closer to the divine than the ink of scholars and the prayers of the pious. It requires action by you. So we've been talking about posture today, and I've looked at posture in many different ways, but it's about doing it. You know, a ton of study is worth an ounce of practice, is another great saying. So engage in this, be consistent, and look to refine, endless refinement, and be looking for improvements constantly. Think about those powerlifters, think about those yoga teachers and those qigong teachers, and the discipline, and just that endless refinement they're aiming for. Why not? Why can't you do it? It's more important today than ever with all the technology around us. So it requires action, and I implore you to get out there and put all these things into practice. Please like and subscribe this video if you found the information useful. To ask any questions related to what we talk about here on the podcast, the email is info@druidhighperformance.com. We have a 15-day longevity program, which includes some key fundamental movement and stability exercises, so posture and movement. A lot of what we've been talking about in episode 1 and episode 2 of the podcast. If you want to enroll on a free 15-day program which is aimed at longevity, please email the same email, info@druidhighperformance.com, to enroll on that program. You get a video every day for a set of days. You get some simple videos looking at some basic patterns, basic exercise, movement patterns and posture. And yeah, please get in touch, like and subscribe, and we'll be back again next time for the final podcast on the longevity series, the longevity triad, and we'll follow up the mobility and the posture episode with a posture about breath before we move on to a new subject of martial arts in episode 4 and moving forward. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll look forward to seeing you again. All the best.